If you have been wondering about Calgary's future and what it's going to look like, well then this video is for you. Today we have a round table conversation with 3 other incredible people who do a ton of real estate work in this city. We've got Devani, who is from middle school, but also co-founder of Round Square. We've got Adam Mansbridge, who is an incredible mortgage broker. And we've got my co-founder of Chamberlain Group, Rebecca Chamberlain here. So if you're wondering what Calgary's gonna look like in the future, where is it going? How does affordability, how does our market, what are some hot neighborhoods, what are great places to invest? Well, this video is for you, so let's get to it. Okay, well, let's just get started. So thank you all for joining me. I mean, this is great. I'm glad to be here with you all. And I wanted to start off kind of talking about market predictions. Where do you think Calgary's real estate market is gonna go and kind of evolve over the next 5 to 10 years? And is there any specific trends that you might see happening given what's kind of happened over the last number of years here?
Oh, we're looking
Whoa,
at me.
they just looked at
wow.
Rebecca.
Wow.
Naturally.
I think Calgary is, just as we know it, has changed. I think that we're going to see actually a shift with people that have been here for a while. A lot of locals, as mortgage changes, move out of the city perhaps or shift, and then people continue to come here. I think we're seeing in Canada more as an option for people to move internationally than we have been over the past, I'd say, decade or ever in my real estate career.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm most of the people that, or I wouldn't say most, but many of the people commonly I'm communicating with people who are still in the Greater Toronto area, Vancouver area, who are wanting to make that change here. And, I think it's a fatal flaw to assume that market conditions will stay the same in any way, shape, or form perpetually. But as long as the prices here, home prices here, are materially lower, significantly lower, lower enough to push, these first-time home buyers, people who really want to make a change, and as long as we have that mobility factor, which you just kind of mentioned, a certain kind of like working cohort is able to go to their employer and say, make me remote or transfer me. I think people are going to continue to look to Calgary first, Edmonton, and secondarily sort of some of the others, mid-population cities in Canada. So, short term, perhaps even midterm, I think we'll continue to see that influx into Calgary, which means it puts pressure on the local population from a home ownership perspective.
But I think there's a lot of population coming in. I mean, and a lot of the new builds that are being built on the outskirts of the city, so many people, especially the last 2 years, have really gone to those new builds, right? I mean, what are you finding inner city when you're looking at people moving into the inner city with the developments you guys are doing?
Yeah, I think like Calgary, for a long time, I'm born and raised here, so I've been here my entire life. I've looked at the volatility of the market. I've been in the market for a very long time. And so the whole conception of Calgary is volatile, boom bust, has always kind of been the nature of our city for the last, as long as I can remember it. I'm 41 now, but I think this is different. Like, I've never felt this way about the market. And it's almost concerning for myself because I'm worried about, not only with the net immigration numbers, but the biggest challenge I think we all face, and it's across the country, is just the lack of production that we're seeing in terms of housing and how do we meet the demand. And so I think Calgary, the numbers just came out for 2023. We had a roughly 100,000 new people and we produced 25,000 homes. Yeah. So we're looking at like a 4-to-1 shortage in terms of the housing numbers that we're producing. And so to me, when I look at market conditions, the challenge will always be for the next 10, 20 years, how do we actually meet the need, let alone the demand, just the need for housing. And so much of the work that I'm doing now is focused on policy and enabling folks to build more housing, particularly within established neighborhoods. And, like Adam said and Rebecca said, like, people are coming to Calgary because it's not a hidden gem anymore. We're 1.7 million people. As much as we want to be a small city, we're not. People are starting to see this place as a great place to raise their children, great amenities, great proximity to the mountains, like everything that we all knew people are now coming for. And so I don't see the growth of this city slowing down by any means. I think the real question is how do we actually increase production of housing? And you know, so much of what I talk about is like, is there an affordable housing strategy? And so much of that has to do with market housing. But politics is so polarizing right now. I'm nervous that we're losing the context and the plot. And so, you know, for me, I don't see prices softening unless we figure out a way to meet demand. And they're trying to create these programs that don't have population pressures, like they're changing in immigration policies, but that doesn't stop people from moving to Calgary for the same reasons Adam just indicated. We're still lower. We're almost a primary city at this point. And so I think there's going to be a lot of movement to secondary, tertiary markets, but I think cities like Calgary, Edmonton, Saskatoon, you know, are well positioned to figure out strategies to meet that demand.
Well, and Calgary's also positioned now internationally, like you were saying, because it ends up having, like, the people that are moving here, the people that we talk to, like, there's people from Mexico, there's people from, like, I could just name off so many countries that we
Israel
helped.
was like a huge
Yeah, there's people from there. And
they can get the job transfers.
Yes.
I'm curious, there has been some talk when I'm meeting with local Calgarians that maybe they moved here from Quebec or they've been here for quite a while, but now I would consider them local after being here for a decade. They're struggling with finding a job. They're thinking of going back east because, you know, the banking industry is bigger out east, and so then there's some movement there. So the question is can the job creation? There's a lot of people coming here, and a majority of the viewers or people that I've helped, they would be working. They're still working remotely. So that's not a job creation. It's just new money flowing into Calgary. So the question is can, even with, you know, we need housing, but we also need jobs because these houses are not cheap.
And not everybody can be remote.
Yeah.
That's
quite
right.
simply.
Yeah.
And the labor pressures that exist or have existed, and I think maybe changing, that allowed people to simply go to an employer and say, look, you're strapped for finding good talent. I'm going to go remote, and, you know, otherwise I'm quitting. I think that's changing. That's not going to stay the same forever. This ability to kind of just say, like, I'm going to work from wherever I want, and the labor market is tight enough that my employer will say yes, that's not going to stay the same. So, you know, that sort of mobility, we'll start to probably see that move away from remote work. We'll start to see, and I'm already seeing it, I think you're kind of hinting at that, you know, I'm talking to some clients who have come here with remote work and who now are looking at going back because it's not the vibe that they were looking for.
It's very isolating. I
yes,
think
yeah.
that even though you're coming here for a beautiful house, which kind of was the flow in COVID, then you come here and you don't have a community, and your community is all back at home, and you haven't maybe made steps to build a community, and so then you're going home because you know, your partner may be great, but, you know, you need more than just one person. Anybody that
So, like, affordability, it's interesting because you brought that up, Al. But affordability, with all the changes that have happened in Calgary over the last, let's call it 6 months, affordability was a big topic about that and around that. However, I don't know if affordability is necessarily going to get better as we move forward, because it's a simple supply demand. That's the most basic thing we can look at. So there was something that came out from ATB Economics where they're talking about from June this year to June last year for new house pricing. It's always resale pricing, but new house pricing. And Calgary had the biggest increase in all of Canada of 4.5%. And then somewhere in Quebec, and then Edmonton was third at 1.3%. But from third place to first place, that's 1.3 to 4.6%. That's a big jump in terms of new home increases. And then you go down to Ottawa, Kitchener, Kelowna, Victoria, those all dropped about 1.9% or more. And so there's this shift that's happening. And some of the things I've read before, Calgary has traded below the benchmark price for the country for a long time. And if we are now on the stage that we're on, that should only kind of go to where it should be. But then that contradicts everything around trying to figure out affordability. So in saying all of that, where do you think affordability is going to go, and how is that going to work? Because if I'm in the market, I already own a property, I can afford the next one because my equity is growing. But if I'm moving from international, I'm paying cash. If I'm something brand new, one of our kids in 10 years buying a property, our kids could buy properties in 10 years. Sorry, it just hit me.
Yikes.
But if any of that happens, how is that going to look for them, or for people who are moving here, or first-time buyers like in this market today? So what is that going to look like, and what can be done to help that be fixed better?
Yeah. So I guess like I break this down to two things. It's like there's a private solution and there's a public solution to this problem, and it won't be solved by either one alone. And neither side likes to hear that, right? Like the public sector doesn't want to believe the private sector will solve affordability and doesn't believe in supply and demand economics. And then the private sector doesn't believe the public sector will make a difference either, because they're creating more constraints, their fees are too high, the process of getting a building permit is too long. And so I think both sides have merit, but also both sides are not necessarily being honest with themselves. Like on the private side, we're all private businesses. If you know the market demand for your product is 8, why are you going to produce 15? Why would you? Why would any of us do that? Like, why would we oversupply the market? Because naturally we're going to saturate and we're going to lower our ROI, which is what our objective is as a private business. We want to make the highest return on investment for our shareholders or our owners.
In that scenario, I'd rather produce 6.
Correct. And so when folks always say like it's market supply and demand, it's like it is to a point. So let's assume that we were able to unlock the constraint levers that were inhibited by policymakers, by public sector. Let's say we were able to actually unlock all the challenges that are making supply hard, whether it's fees, whether it's, let's call it suburban growth overlay plans where they don't want new housing, let's call it rezones. Let's assume there was no constraints, that the public sector was impeding the private sector. The private sector will not go and flood the market. It just wouldn't, it doesn't make any sense from a business perspective. So I appreciate when the private sector says like, so it's supply and demand, it's supply and demand. Yes, we all understand it's supply and demand to a point. And so I think what everyone is saying is we're struggling to create supply because the market economics don't make sense and because the public impediments are stopping us from creating the supply. Now, whether or not you agree with that sentiment or not, there's truth to that, from my mind, just on the private side. On the public side, the Canadian government, both sides, regardless of what side of the political spectrum you sit on, pulled out of affordable housing in the 80s. Basically, it just stopped from a federal policy perspective producing housing. And so we haven't seen like volumes of public housing being produced because they left it to the municipalities who were not financed to do it. They basically kept the portfolios that they have. And so we've seen very little supply of true public, deep, affordable housing.
And it's interesting you say that, because even when you look at some of the stats, or when you look at years built of certain townhomes complexes in Calgary, there's a ton coming up in the 70s and 80s. As soon as you hit the 90s, it stops. And then you get into 2008, and then builders are starting to, it's not affordable, it's just they're building it because of the need. So I've never even thought of that.
And so all I was trying to say is like, it's a both and. And there's no one type of housing form that we should be producing. We should be producing all types. And that's what most people don't understand. There's no silver bullet to solve this problem. We need 3.5 million net new homes in Canada. That's not including the 2.5 we're producing, on pace to produce by 2030. So just try to hit any level of affordability. And we've only produced 250,000 homes a year at our like max capacity. And so the problem is severe. The solutions will have to be collective and innovative. And in each place, the problems are slightly different, right? Like even when you talk about the microeconomics of some of these things, they're different. The inner city process versus the new growth process, the new growth struggles versus the inner city struggles. And so it's just so nuanced. It's hard to say that this one thing will solve all. And that is probably my biggest fear is like, if the public sector decides to overstep and introduce policies that they think could potentially, I don't know, like let's assume that we see rent control in the next 5 years. Like rent control can have very negative implications to a market that's trying to produce the supply of housing.
The private sector.
Correct. Yeah. And so it's a sweeping policy that sometimes I think are not well thought through. And so my hope, like the whole reason why we're doing what we're doing is trying to figure out how to really carve a road in between and find solutions for both sides of the fence.
Well, and it's interesting that you said, because the number you said was it one house for 4 people?
So the net
Canada?
that we're, no, just Alberta alone for 2023. Okay. So I think we were close to 96,000 new residents and population growth, only produced 25,000 homes.
Okay, because the number, when I pulled it mid-23, it was actually 9 people for one house.
Yeah.
So that's gotten better.
I think so. Like certain places have gotten worse because
sure.
they've had lower production levels.
Yeah.
I think like Ontario had its least amount of housing produced and is starting to lose population. So not surprising.
All of that,
and so there's so many things at play here. And then government is, people who are in real estate can't really ever say that they're not in the business of government, because we all are. The interest rates have a massive implication for all of us. The policies, the fees, like unfortunately, like if you're in the real estate business and you don't have some kind of GR in your mind frame, you're missing out on, a lot of the leaders that are carving the way. And so then, how do you use your voice to make sure that what you're seeing is being translated to hopefully influence policy?
Well, and affordability too, it's so hard to influence on the real estate sales side, on the resale, because you're now dealing with consumers and they want what they want and they will pay what they will pay, and that's kind of the end of it. And so, but from a mortgage standpoint, have you heard anything in terms of what could come in or what has come in to help with affordability?
Well, for starters, I think it's very telling that, and I'm not sure if this was a leak or not, that that CMHC, internal communications in CMHC are basically indicating that all the measures being taken right now, being discussed right now, will have zero effect on affordability, and the cost of living will simply continue to go up. That building more won't do it, and part of the reason for that is because, you can think of existing homes as like a fixed piece. We've got to introduce more housing, which has to be built, and there's a structural nature to the cost of creating this, and the vector is really, really narrow. I just read a report, or I read a take by Benjamin Tall, who I think is CIBC's chief economist, and just very clever guy. Benjamin is basically saying that, look, the cost of building these homes and then the availability or the probable sale price is so narrow now that it's kind of approaching a stalemate, where developers will be like, well, there's no point in building more. We're not compelled to, because the sale price is kind of at its minimum limit right now. And so, the measures being taken, even CMHC, themselves believe that this will have zero effect. So, I mean, if we're talking pure affordability, we're really talking about an extremely narrow margin that might exist in the cost of borrowing. And that reducing, 2%, whatever, the Bank of Canada is projected to reduce in this decreasing cycle, a total of between 2 and 2.5%. It sounds great. And for, borrowers who've been on the sidelines waiting for rates to go down, waiting to see their ability to qualify increase, for those who have existing variable rate mortgages who have endured that rate hiking cycle. Yeah, I'm with you.
Do you have a variable too?
Who are waiting?
All of us, who are waiting variables through all of this, people.
Yeah. Who are waiting, for the relief.
It's interesting.
It's going to have an effect, of course, but that effect has time. That effect is probably minimal in the grand scheme of things. And at the same time, nobody believes that the cost of housing is going to go down. Yeah. It's only going to go up. So,
Yeah, and I think one thing like a lot of folks overlook is like in the last 5 years, CMHC kind of changed their core value structure, which was everyone should own a home. That's not the mandate.
Right.
The mandate is everyone should have a roof over their head. So what is the quickest path to affordability? Like, obviously not good for sales and mortgage broker, but it's not home ownership.
Right.
Like home ownership is becoming a privilege, not necessarily a right.
Yeah.
It's something that is getting further and further out of reach. But the best way to create housing affordability is going to be through creating perpetual rental affordable housing.
Yeah.
And there's groups that are recognizing this. Like this city of Calgary has, I sit on the board of Calgary Housing Corporation, which is the largest non-for-profit provider of housing in the city, and their entire model is rental. But then there's like Attainable Homes, which is also a city arms, and Attainable's model is to actually provide home ownership, but they have a perpetual model where you get to buy your home, but when you sell your home, you only get inflation growth. There's no market growth.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's just like another form of renting. Like you're not buying that as an asset to increase the price. And
Like
so
rent to own discounted.
correct.
sort of.
Yeah. And all I would say is like, if we're looking for the government or policies to make it easier for us to own homes, we all would love that, like for your businesses. I just don't see that being the core objective today. And so when we talk about like, how do we create affordable housing in the buy-sell sector, I'm not necessarily sure that's like going to be the highest priority. And if it was, what you're seeing in Calgary is probably going to be the only way to actually create housing affordability. It's through controlled land prices, because the cost to build is the cost to build.
Yeah,
the
fixed.
only thing we get to control that's not fixed is our land basis. So either city-owned land or new growth annex land is the cheapest way to build housing, and has been for the last, since World War II. It's why we have so many suburbs.
Yeah, and that's why the sprawl is so big.
Yeah.
I talked to a lot of colleagues back in Ontario and some on the BC side, the Greater Vancouver area, and in a lot of ways, it's been super creative to try and determine ways to alone create affordability for borrowers. And I know mortgage brokers in the GTA who, when they're connecting with a first-time home buyer, the first question is not what do you do for work and what's your income. The first question is, have you got parents that own a home? Because how are you getting your minimum $200,000 to buy this $1 million property for starters? So, and you're not going to go in with conditions. So have you got a parent who's created massive amounts of equity through the 30 years that they've owned this home in the Toronto area or anywhere in Ontario? And can we tap into that via a potential refinance? Can we tap into that via a potential home equity line of credit to create your down payment and create that backup for you if this all falls apart and you have to pay with cash? And that's what the creativity of the marketplace does to help create affordability when it's like a synthetic method of creating affordability when there are no government or there are no policy factors.
Yeah, and I don't want to not give you a chance to,
No,
Rebecca,
it's
but
a-
this is like what you just described is like the core reason why we created Middle. Is like you described the parent or the boomer who is sitting on a potentially mortgage free because they bought in a time where it was much more affordable. The growth of their home is substantially more, and their children are struggling to find a place to live.
And we'll get there eventually.
Correct.
Oh, yeah.
And so, for me, the idea of someone sitting on an established areas lot that owns their home outright, but feels that their only option is to sell that home is why I was like, this can't be the only way. There has to be a way to democratize how we can revitalize these neighborhoods, those lots, to not only provide housing for that boomer or that parent, but also their children.
Yeah.
And that's what I've been doing my entire career, but I've been the one buying those lots.
Yeah.
And then being like, I wonder where that person's gonna go now. And it's like, cool, you got $1 million, but now what? Where do you go back in the market? But to say, oh, my $1 million with CMHC's new programs could provide housing for my family, unlock my equity, and provide fixed rate rents for my family and my children and my community
And
is
income.
is generationally profound. Like I've never seen a policy like this: 50-year amortizations, 95% loan to cost, and a CMB bond rate. Like it's actually something that is unbelievable. And the only challenge that we're facing today is like homeowners don't know that it even exists. They don't know how to access it. There's this barrier to entry. And that's why we created Middle. It was like, I can actually just take everything that we've done and figure out how to make sure you can do that for yourself, rather than simply me buy it me turn it into a rental product, and then eventually all those become these unaffordable $4,000 renter townhomes because everyone wants to live there. And so I like what you just described for me is the exact reason why we created this program.
Yeah. So let's spin on there a little bit. So in thinking about the sprawl of Calgary, thinking of the inner city potential growth that's happening as well, thinking of people who are coming to our city in truckloads, it feels like. I mean, that's going to settle down. It's going to be constant, though. I don't think it's going to stop. So with all of that, where do you think are some new developments or some neighborhoods in Calgary that have some really great potential for growth?
Well, you're the builder. But
Yeah, but I'll let you're on the front lines of the market.
I think the fascinating part, and I mean, it's so, I feel like I should have done a little bit more research on your background because you're fascinating to listen to. And just the whole, because you see a different part of the market than I do. And they're part of it, you even drive around, we're sitting in Mount Pleasant, and, you drive around in Capitol Hill and Banff Trail, those communities drastically look different than even 5 years ago in the density. And so some of it is a little bit of a mind shift from fellow local Calgarians that they can live in high density, right? So if you're born, Jared and I are both born and raised similar to yourself in Calgary. And so there's that, Calgary dream of owning your own house, big lot.
Yep.
And I mean, we have a large lot as well, but do we have time to actually spend in that lot? That's a totally different conversation. And as even what a family looks like today, not every family, but kids are more involved in sports and dance and all these things. So I mean, I know this is offsetting your initial question is, I mean, I think the inner city has tremendous huge growth potential just for the sake of our inner cities are kind of abandoned. People go to, there's more people that live in Mahogany than there is in Crescent Heights. So the amenities that you find, if you live in Mahogany outweigh sometimes the potential of living in Crescent Heights. So I think that a lot of these inner city neighborhoods can be further revitalized. It's just a huge mind shift for people not to have this. Calgary is filled of green space. So we need to utilize that green space better. And make it more friendly for families. Like you walk around Vancouver and you see all these people just leaving their homes and enjoying parks. I mean, again, we have the struggle with weather, but I do think Mount Pleasant, Capitol Hill, Altador's almost peaked. That's saturated. The density. Some people are choosing to leave Altador just because the density has gotten too much for them. There's Curry, which is fascinating because they are already ahead of the high density, but people don't always choose Curry because they don't have the lots. So I think there's a shift potential of what people expect from the marketplace.
And I think there's a lot of people who moved in initially have bought in the suburbs, and because they didn't know where to buy, and they just wanted unseen. They just wanted new with a warranty. Yeah. And over the next 5 years, to further what you're thinking, I think they're going to start going, wait a minute, I love XYZ community. And then they're going to start trying to figure out how to get into wherever they really wanted to be because they had to buy something that they didn't love. I don't know.
Yeah, it's just I always laugh because I've heard so many people tell me how awful Marda Loop is and how awful Altador is now because of the traffic and the density and the roads. And I'm crossing my fingers that proves true to the market on the numbers, but it doesn't. Which is so frustrating because I'm I want a lot price to really substantially reduce so I can move back into Altador, but the numbers continue to climb.
It'll stay high.
Yeah.
It's not going to drop.
But that's the thing that I always find so shocking is people complain about it, but I actually think exactly what you're saying is happening. There's just people are coming who have lived in Toronto inner city and are this is not busy.
Yeah.
I love this neighborhood.
That's the exact question. I had someone move from Ontario and she's like, where are all the people?
Yes.
And I'm like, what do you mean? They're here. And
it took me 5 minutes to drive this.
And then I was like, Chinook Mall? Where are the people?
Yeah.
But if you want, Altador Marda Loop has such much more of a vibrance than some, and Inglewood's getting there.
Yeah.
I think Kensington, there's still a shift in there.
Yeah.
I think we have too many cannabis vaping shops sometimes
Yeah.
to make a family feel like comfortable to, not comfortable, but more just like, oh, I want to explore this street.
Yeah, I think my favorite community in the entire city of Calgary is probably Bridgeland, because I think it's the most complete community. It has 50% of the affordable housing, like of its whole entire community has that in it, which is, I think, is amazing. It's got a great school. It's got great commercial. I think it has the best food in any neighborhood. But it's also got just good diversity. Like Dominion is a beautiful building. Probably my favorite mid-rise building is Mike Bucci, who built that building, the two towers. I think they're so great. Marie Bake Shop on the main floor. Like, so I would choose Bridgeland over any
I do
community.
miss that shawarma shop that
Yeah.
Little Empire went into.
Yeah.
That shawarma place
Yeah.
that was there.
So
good.
Yusuf's family own that. He owns the Bridgeland Market across the street
Okay.
still. So like he helped kind of like, his mom was retiring. I think his family was kind of retiring, but that place is great. But yeah, no, I love Bridgeland. It's got the Italian heritage. So you still have like a lot of those Italian restaurants still there. But yeah, I think it's, I think your first, back to your question, is like what communities, the citywide rezoning, ending exclusionary zoning is going to be a really interesting thing, because it's not just ending it for all of these inner city communities that are like the first ring, it's the second and third rings that will also be impacted. So the communities that no one was really maybe considering at the time are now going to be considered. Varsity, even in the north, like Temple, Rundle, Whitehorn, like all of those communities, like I grew up around, Forest Lawn, Dover, Albert Park, like they all have the exact same fabrics of any of the other inner city communities we love. They just have negative stigmas because of what's happened there.
That's a tough thing to get over, though.
Yeah.
And I've seen it in Ontario. When we lived in Toronto, and communities and neighborhoods that have poor reputations are the last to change. The ones that have a reputation of being old, left untouched, are the ones that will change first, and they'll change the fastest. And I've seen it with my own clients. Purchasing shrewdly in places like Ogden, where you buy something for like right around the $300,000 mark 7 or 8 years ago, and it's like they've made away like bandits.
We call it the Deerfoot Divide, but I think I think it's changing though. Like I've seen Albert Park start to revitalize now, and
I think out of any of those areas, that's the one that'll go first.
That's going first because of the new BRT. It's still really close to downtown, but like you think about Rundle and Whitehorn, like just I grew up like in those communities as a kid, running around, but like the transit is on your doorstep. The trees are absolutely stunning. Like it still has all the characters, and so like if anyone was to ever ask me like if I wanted to buy this and eventually make plans to redevelop, and I'm not in the next 5 years, I always advise everyone to go there because I just think it has the highest potential.
The only problem with it is there's such a massive commercial zone, industrial zone that breaks it up
with the Sunridge Mall
from the rest of the city. And it is its own island out there. And so that's the only thing, if that ever changes somehow.
But then you think about the existing transit. Like that's why I'm excited about it, is because it already has a lot of the infrastructure that you would want
to be able to get in.
It's got a great hospital on that side too. Like it just has everything that you would ever want. And so when you think about population, and it's multicultural in nature, and so some people like it, some people don't.
And when you circle back to the affordability, earlier we talked about a lot of that side of things. Those communities are the ones that are growing the fastest right now in terms of year-over-year growth. And we just released a video about it, and it's, you read the top 20 fastest growing communities. There's only, I think, 2 or 3 that weren't in the east, like the upper southeast, not like the mahogany southeast, but the southeast, east, and northeast. Everything was in there. And again, it's just because it is the most affordable, and it is going to rise naturally.
If I had one like beef with that community, is just maybe like, I know that there's some great counselors that like try to like advocate for those communities, but like they've seen very little investment, which is frustrating when you compare the investments that have gone into the west side.
Absolutely.
And so it's like, I bet you, again, we probably look at this, someone call me out, I don't know if there's a single bike lane in any of those established neighborhoods.
I don't think there is. But it's interesting you say that, because one of the things that's come out now, and I don't remember the name of what it is, I'm just in the middle of researching it, but in Martindale, one of the big projects that they're working on is creating bike lanes and pathways so that kids, because it has when you look at some of the mental health issues across the city, those areas have some of the highest.
Yep.
And so this is one of the things that I think it's the city. I don't know who it is, but it's but I'm in the middle of
Avenue's
figuring
doing
this
an
out. But Avenue Magazine had a big thing, and Yamina is the writer that's doing it, and I'm chatting with her about it. But anyways, but it's interesting to see. I was like, wow, that's kind of cool that they're actually investing something over, because they need to.
Totally.
Because it needs to change.
And whenever the city, I think, invests money into a community, like you look at University District, how that's even changed different parts of Varsity. Varsity's always done really well, but now there's amenities to walk to. It has, now those baby boomers, in theory, have a place to downsize, though those condos are about the same value as their house. So let's call it right sizing. But that changes even, I think you're right. There needs to be more investment in the Northeast. I think it's kind of I don't know if it's a black sheep, but it's an area that is constantly ignored, so that it doesn't give people a draw, unless you have a community base or family base that draws you to those areas.
Yeah. Well, it's also like Mountain View Park, and where the mobile home park was for years, where they're redeveloping all of that. And that's supposed to be very similar to kind of that University District feel once it's kind of finished. So things like that, I think those mini urban centers, if they start popping up around the city, like imagine Crossroads. If Crossroads Market, that whole big area, if that turned into something like University District, well, now there's your bridge between the rest of the city and the Northeast. But something like that could be so impactful for those that are around it, right?
Yeah, and I think like over the last 10 years, there's two things people don't recognize is like the citywide rezoning thing, again, super controversial for the established neighborhoods, but most people don't understand that since 2007, every single new communities-based district is an RG, which means as of right, they can have 4 units. So every single suburb that was built after that year had the exact same policy, and that's now in perpetuity. You're not allowed to have a single family zone now if you're building in a new growth community. So it's like, really, it was super controversial, but it was already happening. But it was happening in these places where folks who live in the established neighborhoods, who've gotten really accustomed to this lifestyle, who are not ready for that change, were just like, well, this is unprecedented. It's like, actually, it's not. And one thing that's really interesting is like we talk about Mahogany, you talk about any of these new growth communities, like even Mackenzie Town, Providence by Dream, all of these communities are being built as like, first of all, they have higher density targets than we have in our established neighborhoods. So many of these new communities are denser than our established neighborhoods, but they're all being built as kind of these 15-minute communities. And I talked to Mike Brown about this, who is now the president of Trico, former CMLC and leader. And I said, like, well, what's the mandate for Trico? And he's like, to be honest, we're not necessarily as concerned about being as close to the core as we have. At all. Because all they're looking for is to build complete communities. So like, could you build a walkable community within the context of that? And that's what they're all doing. They're building these new beautiful master plans that work, live, play.
And Seton was one of those first ones
100%.
that came out. Where they were like, this is what we're going to do. It never really transpired, but that was like, I think one of the first communities that was so far out of the city. When I remember hearing about it 10 years ago or whatever the years were, and I was like, what are they talking about? Like, that's so far out. But it's what's happening.
Sorry, it's a little huffy. But Mackenzie, only because I have an urban study degree, is like Mackenzie Town was like the area that they wanted to...
The experiment.
The experiment, but because there's no city transit. Like, that's, again, where you need the government or some government investment. And, with the Green Line, that will change Center Street dramatically. But again, you need people, and then to use those, and you need those options. So I just think Mackenzie Town, when you go there and their street life or like their little main street, kind of needs a refresh. Like it hasn't done as well as, some of these newer areas have done. So, I mean, that will be interesting as you create more of these University District areas. Will then that hurt other commercial areas because they want to be in the more buzzy zones?
Well, I don't think so, because if you have more population, but it kind of just keeps adding.
But I think it does, though. Like this is what every North American city is facing.
From downtown core.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's like the death of downtown, because we talk about work from home, we talk about flexibility in work schedule, the need for commuting. Like, this is one of the biggest, hottest topics, right? Because if you built your downtown as a CBD, like a central business district, like Calgary did, like Edmonton did, like Calgary at a per square foot office retail to like size of city was like one of the largest in the world, because we just went gangbusters when oil and just thought everyone needs an office. And so that's
their
why
own office.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why this office
With a window.
conversion strategy was so critical for us to bring some of those millions of square feet off the table. But like, I think it's both and. I think you're going to have people that don't necessarily need to commute into the core as often, but I love what the city's doing with, like, you know, the entertainment district. I love, as much as I hate Stampede, I love it for what it does for our city. I mean, when I say I hate it, it's just like when you live here and you every year you get like,
It's a great week to go away.
you get 2 weeks of like pure debauchery in your city. And I mean, I'm always excited. I think it's the fascinating thing for Stampede. I think it's turning into a bit of a music festival, which is kind of neat to see.
Yeah, it is.
But I just think like the more we can do to build these complete cities, complete communities, the better it's going to be. And hopefully the more we can stop investing in roads and parking and more into transit is just it's going to make the quality of the lives that we spend here so much better.
Yeah, those are the hallmarks of a true city, a city that becomes a place that people seek out. And people seek out Calgary for sure, but they're seeking it out for different things than that. Then they get here and they realize maybe they want these things to stay and to have a nice life.
So I'm going to end on this because we're kind of already there. Like 3 of us have been born and raised. You've been here for 10 years, 11 years. So knowing Calgary, from what you've seen it from to where it is now, what do you hope it looks like in the next 10 years? Where do you hope, and this could also be some of the attitudes of consumers, because I think that's the biggest change that needs to happen, is those that have been here for so long. Where do you hope that looks?
I mean, I moved here 11 years ago from Liberty Village in Little Italy in downtown Toronto, and that will make some people shudder. I loved it. I loved it. I loved being able to walk out to restaurants and, you know, small music venues and local movie theaters, not the big ones. And I just loved that sort of like aspect of those communities that encourages you to live in your community and to participate in your community. And I mean, one of the things that we loved so much about moving here was that we could be in a place where there are, you know, no services and it's quiet and it's safe to raise a family. And I think that there's this idea of like, you know, safe to raise a family. Lots of families are raised in huge inner cities. They feel safe and they feel very happy. And I think one of the things I miss is that aspect, that sort of like, it's great to be here. Would be nice to sort of feel encouraged by your community, to participate in your community more and actually truly live in it. And so, you know, as we see people coming in and population growing and the need to change the city, very controversial, you know, zoning changes and that kind of thing. I think the net end place is going to be inevitable, and I think it will be just fine, and I think it's going to be better. Like everything that is the result of collaboration, I think it will be a better end result that encourages people to live more within their communities. That's where I see it going, and I kind of can't wait.
I mean, there's so many so many factors. I mean, exactly that. You want a more vibrant, I think you want these communities to be more vibrant, more people enjoying their community, but we need to have the people to support those businesses. I think you bring up a great point, just even with, and you're seeing this downtown and stuff, we need to really understand as a country how affordable housing and mental health, and because we have parts of the city that have just, you don't want to go to compared to even 5 years ago. I mean, even in Brentwood, we have little villages of tents that kind of pop up, and so we need affordable options, or we need options for people to, as far as with drug addictions and all that needs to be talked about. It's not always just about affordability. There's mental health and how people see the world. So I mean, that's a very I mean, there's going to be so many twists and turns as far as what a city looks like and policies and how do we support those instead of just kind of sit on our armchairs and give opinions is a big question. So I mean, I think it's gonna, the hope is better. I think there's gonna be messy things along the way. And I think we really need to pay attention to affordable housing options and mental health.
Yeah, I guess I would just say like I'm an optimist, and so like I believe in people. My hope for the city is particularly just around the diversity of housing and almost just like a cultural revolution in terms of how we live and how we maybe enjoy being around each other. Like if anything for me coming out of COVID was that isolation has led to more people the desire to be around one another. And so I just want to hope for myself is, can I help contribute to the framework and fabric of like bringing people closer together around communities that I've been lucky enough to enjoy myself. And so I would just say, I feel like amidst all the political kind of social media vitriol that we see, I still have faith in that there is good people out there that are doing good things. And I'm always excited myself to call Calgary home, and I'm always very proud of that. And I'm hoping that, my kids will also want that for themselves. Not that I'm not okay with them living anywhere else. I just hope that we build such a great city that they feel like there's a place for them here. And so like if we could continue to focus on arts, culture, people, I think like for me that this city will then be that desirable place where hopefully not only do my kids want to live and stay in and build their homes, but other folks come to choose this place. And my parents were refugees and they were fortunate enough to reside here. And so I always feel like a little bit of an obligation of like, how do I make sure other folks get that opportunity? Because my parents were lucky enough to be here. And if I can help make a difference in, even anecdotally or in passing some of the work that we do that gives someone else that opportunity, for me, that would be awesome. And I think the city has all the ingredients for that.
Well, I hear the common thread of what you guys are saying is hope. And I also agree. I think there's a ton of hope for our city. And I really believe that whatever comes out of all of these things is we are able to hear each other and be able to come up with a city that makes our kids proud. Because like you, I would rather my kids live here, but I'm pretty sure they're going to be like, ooh, where can we go? But to be able to look back at Calgary and go, wow, this is a great place. This is where we're from. This is what it is. And I really believe through all of this that for all of you watching, I hope this is good information. I hope that you can sense from a real estate agent, from someone who's involved in building forever, a mortgage broker, myself, we're all in real estate. But the thing that's different here is we all want a good future. We're not just here just to make money. We're not here and I think so many people look at this industry as like just trying to scrape the bottom of the barrel with cash and just try to get as much as we can. But what is coming in our city and where we're going, and because of all of you guys who have moved here, it's going to create such a wonderful future for us all. So I want to thank you guys for being here, talking about Calgary's future, and I hope this is good for you too.